to threaten the very foundations of that system. And so, because a scorpion stings because it's a scorpion, imperialism has to come up with a new plan to divide people. The fake nationalities and the kings and the presidents are falling like bricks. So, what new wheeze or old wheeze reheated can we bring forward? Perhaps to ensure another century of division, weakness, corruption and theft for the people of the Arab area. And you know where I'm heading with this. This deliberate Western policy of encouraging the division of the Muslim people on a sectarian basis is the new Sykes-Picot. It's Sykes-Picot 2. That doesn't mean there are no real divisions between Sunni and Shia. Doesn't mean that there are not tensions intrinsically, inherently there for 1400 years. But if you can devise a policy, am I going on too long, Andrew? If you can devise, Seamus, sorry. If you can devise a policy which makes that division, that sectarian division, the primary division in the Muslim world, then you are guaranteed strife, conflict, weakness, and a continuation of the imperial system for another century. And that's why you get such grotesque, as Seamus pointed out in his wonderful article last week in The Guardian, such grotesque spectacles as Mrs. Clinton announcing a new organization once they failed to get their way in the United Nations, called Friends of Democratic Syria, led by Bahrain, which is murdering the democracy protesters in its own streets, all the while joining, indeed sponsoring, the Friends of Democratic Syria. Saudi Arabia, which has actually invaded and is occupying Bahrain, the better to murder the democracy protesters there, and has always murdered the democratic protesters in its own country, and where there is no freedom of any kind, no liberty of any kind, the unfreest country on the earth, is a sponsor of the Friends of Democratic Syria. Qatar, where there is equally no democracy at all, but there seems to be lots of money, which might explain the situation we're in now, where all roads, even the World Cup, seem to be headed for Doha. Not me, although thanks to Dr. Kamal, I'm free now to go to Egypt. I'm banned from Qatar. So I can speak my mind without fear or favour on that question. But none of which is to say, and I said this in the last meeting to a very large audience of Shiite Muslims in Maida Vale, I don't say one thing in one place and a different thing in another, not least because there are always cameras recording what you say. None of which means that there are not real issues in Syria. The fact that there's a foreign conspiracy, an imperialist conspiracy, using its stooges in the Gulf, of course, is clear. A blind man could see it. But that doesn't mean that the continuation of more than 40 years of one family rule in Syria can be countenanced by anyone who believes in democracy, anyone who believes in freedom. These dictatorships, all of them, must come to an end. And the question of how they can come to an end was dealt with by Seamus in the article in The Guardian very clearly. There has to be negotiation, there has to be a new constitution, there has to be parliamentary elections, there has to be presidential elections, the rights of minorities must be protected, and heaven knows Syria has enough minorities, 26 different, patchwork quilt of 26 different nationalities and confessions and even religions. The Syrian people, like any people, have the right to rise up to try to overthrow their government. But they don't have the right to demand that we support our country bombing their country in order to bring it about. It's very, very clear. We should be for a democratic revolution in Syria and absolutely against the recolonization of Syria, which incidentally was one of the biggest bones of contention between Sykes and Picot in the first place. The fact that the Syrian opposition can sit in Paris, which was their colonial overlord, and plot to persuade Western countries to bomb their own people and their own country, as happened in Libya, is indeed grotesque. But so is the idea of one family rule for more than 4 decades, now into its 5th decade. So we should be clear on these matters. We're clear that we're with the people in Tahrir Square. We should be clear that we're with the elected parliament. You know, we're in Bloomsbury. At the time, the Bloomsbury set, in their house magazine, The New Statesman, declared against the Irish Revolution led by Connolly and Pearse and the Irish revolutionaries who seized the General Post Office in O'Connell Street in Dublin. They didn't like them here in Bloomsbury. They thought they were priest-ridden, bog-trotting, religious obscurantists. But they missed the point that the Irish revolutionaries had no need of a certificate from Bloomsbury. The only certificate they required was from the Irish people, which they got in full measure in due course. So there will be people here, I have no doubt, who are sorry that 75% of the Egyptian parliament are Islamists. Well, get over it. Get used to it. The Egyptian people have spoken, and in overwhelming numbers have spoken in the way that you know that they have spoken. I hope it's nothing I said, brother.
Everything you said.
Everything I said, okay. Salaam alaikum. The point is, we have to be here in the imperial heartland itself, the source of so much misery here in London, in Britain. Very clear that we will not accept our country going back to being an imperial colonizing power again. There was a brief moment when we were bereft of territories that we could occupy and exploit. That period was brief indeed, and especially since Mr. Blair, we have been back on the war path over and over again. We in the Stop the War Coalition, which all of us are partisans of, will not accept that. Whatever we think of this or that regime at this or that time in any part of the Arab world. Wassalamu alaikum. Thank you very much.